I'm Virginia Holtz, member of the League for a long, long time, back in the other century. And I am also on the board of the Open Space Authority, of which Andrea is the general manager, who I will present in a moment. A recent study nearing completion on economic benefits of open space is being carried out through a Healthy Lands, Healthy Communities initiative, which demonstrates the economic value of natural areas and working lands in Sonoma, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties. For the first time, science-based metrics are being used to determine the economic value of natural areas and the potential financial return through land conservation and stewardship. I'd like you to welcome Andrea McKenzie, General Manager of the Open Space Authority, and the second panelist is Karen Gaffney, Conservation Planning Program Manager for Sonoma County's Ag Land Preservation and Open Space District.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Can everybody hear me out there? I hope everyone had a great lunch, and we hope we'll keep you lively and awake this afternoon as we present what we think is coming down to the ground level of a lot of what you heard this morning from some pretty compelling speakers, Wendy and Jeremy and others, about the importance of open space and the economic benefits of open space. I also wanted to thank the League of Women Voters for profiling and focusing on this important topic. While it doesn't always rank at the top of public polling issues, we want to change that, and it's really critical that we do. And so some of the things we're sharing with you today will give you the tools to help us do that. I'm sure many of you have seen this image over time. This is the San Francisco Bay Area from the air. We know the San Francisco Bay Area as home, one of the most attractive and vibrant metropolitan areas in the United States to live, with the San Francisco Bay as our centerpiece and over 1.3 million acres of open space, parks, and farmland surrounding it that have been permanently protected, as we've heard, with public funds and with public support. A recent support by the Bay Area Economic Institute found that this network of protected lands is a significant contributor to a $535 billion regional economy here in the San Francisco Bay region. As Virginia said, I'm the general manager of the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority. I'm very proud to lead this agency. We're one of 6 open space districts in the 9-county Bay Area. We were created 20 years ago to balance growth in the 1,000 square mile area of Santa Clara County in the Silicon Valley by protecting greenbelts, natural resources, and agricultural lands. We've protected over 16,000 acres to date, and we're funded by a modest local property assessment and augmented by many of the funds that Sam Schuckett talked about earlier, federal funds, state park and resource bonds, and foundations. We're a relatively small agency with a small budget, but we have a huge territory and a huge responsibility. We take pride in our role as the steward of our region's natural capital, our air, our water, and soil, which support over 1.8 million people. So I want you to think ahead a little bit. 30 years from now, what is the San Francisco Bay Area going to be like? We, along with our open space and park partners around the region, are facing unprecedented new challenges, which we've heard about. Over 2.1 million more people coming to the San Francisco Bay Area, dwindling funds for open space protection and resource stewardship, loss of biodiversity and wildlife habitat, loss of our remaining prime farmland, and the myriad effects of climate change, which are so evident to us right now with a record drought and wildfires of recent note throughout California. This is one of my favorite slides that has been shared with us by an economist that we've been working closely with. While the Bay Area has been a model for both the quantity and quality of land protected, we have, as we know, many competing challenges for the public's resources. economic challenges facing our state, our region, and our communities. And many people see open space as a luxury item, a nice thing to have when times are good. A lot of government agencies and private sectors, business agencies, do not have nature or public lands or open space of any kind on their balance sheets. Nature is not an asset that is recorded on those balance sheets. And that's because we tend to see nature services as free. So we tend to see this picture you see up on the screen. The economy is subordinate, the environment is subordinate to the economy. But I think most of us in the room see it more like this. We need a healthy environment to support a healthy economy. And while it seems like a no-brainer, we've got to work really hard to change this paradigm across multiple sectors. So as Wendy Pulling said this morning, while we have a passion and a love for wildlife and nature and green spaces and scenic hills, we appreciate that intrinsic value provided by our open spaces. We know we've got to make also a business case, a strong business case for the protection of the environment. To maintain the health of open space and natural systems and to address these significant challenges that I've just mentioned, we know that we need to scale up the investment in open space and nature conservation, to look at nature and open space as critical infrastructure. And I can remember back, it's probably going on 20 years ago now, that I worked for the East Bay Regional Park District, and going to night meetings in Contra Costa County with city councils and planning commissions, and talking about open space and nature as important as built infrastructure, roads, bridges, schools, right? And many people looking at you like, what had you just smoked? So it's taken us a long time to get to this place, but we're still making this argument, and now we're putting the numbers behind it to show that open space as green infrastructure is absolutely essential, as much as those roads and bridges, highways and schools. So we see the future of conservation in the Bay Area and the funding to support it coming about through integrated planning and investment, both public and private investment, cross-sector collaboration, new protection tools, which we'll talk about, new funding sources, and measuring and establishing new metrics for the health of our region's economy by the health of nature, by the health of natural capital. I'm involved in a couple of efforts now with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and Joint Venture Silicon Valley to try and change these metrics of how we measure the health on an ongoing basis of the environment, because right now they do not include any of the things that you've heard today. In 2012, open space partners in 3 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area, Sonoma, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz, came together with our chief collaborator, Earth Economics, out of Tacoma, Washington, to value our region's natural capital and the benefits people receive from nature and natural systems. And by now, since you've heard this a number of times today, we call these ecosystem services. So up here on the screen are 8 of the many ecosystem services produced by our landscapes across the Bay region that we are now putting a dollar value on. In 2014, Earth Economics will produce for the 3 counties and individually for each county a groundbreaking first ever study of the economic value and benefits of open space, natural areas, and working lands, our farms and ranches in the Bay Area. A study that will hopefully make the direct link between continued investment in conservation and regional economic vitality. We have copies of the scope of work and the proposed study over there on the table that I'd encourage you to pick up, and stay in touch with us as that study rolls out in the next month. We obviously couldn't do this kind of work without the help of funders. And I think of these three entities as the venture capitalists of conservation right now. They are just really, these three are holding us all up across the region. The Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, and our favorite public agency, the State Coastal Conservancy. So some of you asked Wendy Pulling this morning to try and get at this question a little bit more. How do we actually value nature and natural capital, especially at a regional or a county scale? So I'm just going to go through a couple of the steps that we are taking with this study that we're undergoing now. First, we identify and map the natural capital assets on the landscape, the actual land cover or vegetation types. These include grasslands, forests, wetlands, estuaries, riparian corridors, and cultivated agriculture. Secondly, we conduct evaluation and quantify the ecosystem services of these different land cover or vegetation types. Those services that those land cover types are producing were up on the screen a minute ago, but the kinds of things are water quality, water supply, reducing the risk of flooding, climate stability, recreation and tourism, local food production. And we're using the values that have been produced in similar studies in other locations. For instance, Wendy showed you the flood study of the Santa Clara River in Ventura County. We can use the findings and the methodology of that study and apply it in a similar location. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel or do initial original work every single time. It gives us a rapid assessment of what those ecosystem services are worth in similar locations. And this is an approach called benefit transfer, which is a scientifically vetted and very well accepted approach to valuing ecosystem services. And then finally, we develop a range of value because this is not a specific science. So what is approximately the range of value of the natural landscapes, those land cover types in each of our three counties? So while the ecosystem services report that Virginia touched on will be coming out, first in Santa Clara County in the next month, and in the next few months in Sonoma and Santa Cruz counties. While the reports are not yet in hand, we've received some preliminary estimates of economic value of natural capital and services in Santa Clara County. So the annual value of ecosystem services produced by 76 unique combinations of land cover type in our county for open space, parks, wetlands, cultivated agricultural lands, etc., is $452 million to $1.6 billion in natural goods and services every year. That's more than is generated by the entire agricultural sector as reported by the Agricultural Commissioner in Santa Clara County. So you know right then and there that we are underestimating in our metrics and in our reporting the value that nature is returning back to the local economy. And finally, before I turn it over to my colleague Karen, I'm going to kind of piggyback on what my colleague Jeremy Madsen at the Greenbelt Alliance was talking about. Okay, so we finished these reports, and we have an approximate range of value for what those ecosystem services are in each of the three counties and across the Bay Area. What do we do with that information now? Well, here's where we think we can move the dial and make some change. That is in planning and policy and funding, just as Jeremy said. First, we believe we can support new and expanded funding in ways that we have never really pursued or achieved before. Plan Bay Area and regional transportation funding, local water district funding and state water bonds, water measures like through our local water districts, and local open space measures, whether they are the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, or our own Santa Clara County Open Space Authority. We can start to put provisions in those funding measures so they fund multiple benefits of conservation, not siloed benefits or siloed conservation. So for instance, Why couldn't we put in an expenditure plan for a funding measure that a portion of the funds raised would go back to incentivize local farmers and ranchers in our counties to do what is not being done currently with the Williamson Act, but much more effectively? So paying those farmers and ranchers to steward those lands for the ecosystem services we just saw on the screen and get public benefit out of that. No one has yet done that in the Bay Area, and there's no reason that we can't start that now. So we can't expect others to do that for us. We've got to be the leading edge that puts that in play, and we hope that that study will send us on that path. Secondly, if we have these kinds of funding sources and this economic argument, we can increase the pace and scale of conservation. So right now, the conservation community buys one property at a time, the process Sam Shuckett laid out for you, and we barely move the dial. And we acquire one piece of property, and next door the other property gets developed, and we've lost that connectivity, and we've lost that watershed benefit. If we want to work at a bigger scale, we need a bigger approach. Yeah. Okay. And lastly, creating new partnerships, transportation agencies, water utilities, health organizations. And here's kind of a unbelievable challenge. Why couldn't we get the business community in the Silicon Valley to agree that the long-term health of the economy in the Silicon Valley is absolutely tied to the health of our landscapes and our water supply system in Santa Clara County? So that's what we're shooting for. So in order to move in this direction, we've got to make a compelling case. We've got to show people how it works on the ground. And so my colleague, Karen Gaffney, is going to show you some of the case studies that we're going to embark on that will do just that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here, and thank you very much to the League for hosting this, and really want to appreciate my visionary colleague, Andrea McKenzie, for the really big picture, and also all the previous speakers. I'm going to drill down a little bit and talk about not only data development and some specific studies that we're doing, but also want to talk a lot about local implications of this work. So Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District was founded in 1990, was reauthorized in 2006 with 76% of the vote, so very strongly locally supported, funded by a 1/4-cent sales tax, and it has a very diverse mission focused on ag preservation, as the name implies, and open space, but also biodiversity, water, recreation, and increasingly we're inserting ourselves into kind of multi-sector dialogues with other groups like water agencies and land use planning agencies towards making sure that our local economy and our local community remain vital and resilient. To date, we've protected about 106,000 acres, predominantly easements, but some fee title. So Andrea alluded to the multiple benefits of conservation. I think conservation is a bit unique in that most things, like a water treatment plant, have kind of a single purpose. And conservation has all of these amazing benefits that accrue to it, and it has things that accrue to it over long periods of time. So we protect land in perpetuity, most conservation organizations do, and it's hard to argue with the benefits of perpetuity. So in order to enhance investment in natural capital, we really need to convince decision makers about the importance of conservation. And as we all know, I think you in this room better than anybody, almost all the land use decisions in California are made via 3 votes on Tuesday. So while we want to do large screening level analyses using land cover about the benefits of conservation at the Bay Area scale, that's really important, as Andrea talked about, we also need to drill down and tell local stories that are meaningful to local decision makers. We have to have credible data that stand up. And, you know, as much as I adore and respect Andrea and Sam and Wendy and Jen and Jeremy and everybody in this room as conservation advocates, you're not the people that we need to convince. We need to get out of the echo chamber. My goal with this project is that we convince the Sonoma County Taxpayers Association, who did not vote to reauthorize the district, that conservation is the best investment they could be making, and that the Jarvis-Gann Taxpayers Association will feel the same way and get in line. And I firmly believe that what we need to do that is to develop really great data that is inarguable. And also, we need to tee up really good decisions for our local decision makers because they're faced, many of them are running 30, 40 different agencies. We're just one. So we need to make sure that they have credible data about the importance of green infrastructure and that they can leave this legacy of community resiliency and have a strategic vision. I saw that East Bay Regional Parks is doing something on Frederick Law Olmsted, and when Wendy was talking about New York, it made me hearken back to, when he was planning Central Park, people were like, "You're crazy, that's a cow field." And, the reality is these changes via development to our open space are irrevocable. And if we don't have, we may not feel especially threatened right now because we have UGBs or Williamson Act or our funding. But unless we plan for all the cow fields that are out there, we're really going to regret some of the decisions we make. So we already heard from Wendy. I won't focus too much on the New York State model, although I think it's really compelling for us to understand that there's a model out there that we can look to and model our own data development programs on. And so just to recap, they basically had a choice about doing an $8 to $10 billion capital outlay with a big O&M cost that would go on forever, and then eventually that capital outlay would degrade, as all built infrastructure does, and depreciate and have to be replaced, or they could invest in conservation, which has all these other benefits, and basically is the gift that keeps on giving. It appreciates over time. Built capital depreciates, natural capital appreciates. And there are so many benefits, and this is where I really want to focus on the New York model that weren't even anticipated. So, for example, disaster resiliency. When Hurricane Sandy blew through, it destroyed New Jersey's water infrastructure. As you know, people were boiling their water for the better part of a month. The day after the storm, Michael Bloomberg tweeted, "New York's water supply is safe to drink." And that was because they were protected by natural infrastructure. And so that investment in conservation, that is not even something they were thinking about when they did these calculations. But we're spending, we don't even want to know how much we're spending on Hurricane Sandy, but it's staggering. It staggers our education budget and many other things we should be expending money on, and it's because we were overinvested in built infrastructure. So another thing I think that's really starting to happen is, how people say, well, I want to know where my food comes from. I think people are starting to think, how do I want my water? And they look up into a watershed, and it makes people feel good to know that their water is being filtered by trees and farms and recreational lands, as opposed to a pumping station, which may have a lot of chemicals. So I think as people become more savvy about how their water is filtered and protected, it's very meaningful to them. So two of the local examples that we're looking at, this is the Pajaro River in Santa Cruz, and then the Coyote Valley watershed, which Jeremy alluded to. We're going to doing a real deep dive looking at the economic value of the watershed and the aquifer, because surprisingly, and as Andrea was mentioning, if you ask the Santa Clara Valley Water District how much the aquifer is worth, they have the pumps and the pipes and various other things, the people on their books, but the aquifer is actually worth zero. And that is the case throughout the country, that these foundational sources of life for us, with which we could not live for more than 3 days, have no value. And so we really need to convey to the public that these things have immense, if not priceless value, and we need to start monetizing that and telling that story. We also need to talk about what it would mean if we lost that value, because those changes in land use that might destroy that aquifer are probably irrevocable. The other thing that's coming out of this process, and of course it's a great time to be thinking about aquifers with the drought on our hands, so really a great time to think about it. Can we address drought in a more long-term, meaningful, and less expensive way? One of the things that's coming out of this process in the Pajaro and the Coyote Valley and in Sonoma County where I am is that agencies which heretofore have not had a lot of integration and have kind of basically just done their own thing, which is conservation groups, well-funded, big, and water agencies, even better funded and even bigger, are starting to talk and starting to work together on some of these issues and starting to see the connection. And so that cultural shift on the part of both agencies and the focus on integration is really, really meaningful. And then finally, I just want to mention that these data that we'll be developing in concert with Earth Economics are really going to help us, for example, as an ag and open space district, enter this information into our decision support tools about where we want to invest in conservation. So very valuable. This is a Sonoma County example. We're going to be doing a primary evaluation or a much more kind of deep dive economic study on this. Again, getting to this point of how do you want your water. This is the Dry Creek watershed on the top left. It's a drinking water source for over 600,000 people in 3 counties. And the district has protected roughly a quarter of that watershed through conservation easements. So one of those easements is the 19,000-acre Cooley Ranch. And if you see on the bottom left, you can see the configuration of basically certificates of compliance or development rights prior to the district purchasing these easements. And it's not the greatest picture, but we had about the potential to do about 65 large mega mansions out there. So kind of a Black Hawk North. This is very far out there past Lake Sonoma, way west of Healdsburg. And so we extinguished those development rights. The water agency, Andrea was telling me because she was here at the time, contributed to the acquisition, which was kind of a first for that kind of integration with a water agency and a conservation group. And then the residential building envelope was shrunk down to only 20 acres out of that whole 20,000. Big agricultural protection area, and then a lot of focus on wildlife corridors and riparian. And so we can value, because we have all the data about what the ratepayers pay for their water in Sonoma County, and we have all the data about how much we spent on acquisition, and then Earth Economics is going to work with us on what are all those multiple benefits related to water supply, which will be first and foremost, of course, but also what are those layers of other benefits? What are the biodiversity benefits associated maybe with having fish and not having to get engaged in a regulatory conflict that's very expensive? What's the carbon sequestration value, which can be economically valued? What are the avoided emissions from not having 65 homes out there where people are driving back and forth every day, building roads, removing habitat, all those externalities that we never account for in development? And then we care about ag viability, of course, and then recreational tourism also has economic benefits. So when you start thinking about, and this is in perpetuity, all these benefits layered on top of one another over perpetuity, then the economic story gets a lot more compelling. And so that's what we really want to tell with credible data at the local scale as well as at the regional scale. Now I'm going to switch gears, talk about kind of a more of an ag-focused study that we're going to be doing. So dairies in Sonoma County in California, I know you're all really aware of this, are very much at risk. It's a very marginal proposition. They're at risk due to market conditions overseas, here, to development pressure, especially in a high real estate value area like Sonoma County, regulatory pressure in terms of water quality. There's not a lot of agricultural infrastructure, especially if development starts to chew holes in that landscape, and they don't have as many secondary services. They require that kind of infrastructure and connectivity to function. And there's a lack of public understanding and support about the values that agriculture and this particular type of agriculture provide in terms of open space and all sorts of other things. Coho populations, which happen to be in the same area of Sonoma and Marin counties, are also at risk. They're endangered due to habitat degradation, poor water quality, and in-stream flows. All of these are a function of the threat of development. So this is a picture of, you can see Salmon Creek, that's named after coho salmon. This is on the Sonoma-Marin County border, kind of the coastal ag focus area, or the dairy belt, as we like to call it, where we work and Malt works a lot. And this is the easements that we have purchased over the last 20-some years. Pretty significant. That's the level of parcelization. Sonoma County is one of the most highly parcelized counties in California. So the development potential out there is pretty staggering. This is kind of a threat level analysis, the darker red being those that are most threatened because they have a lot of potential, whether through zoning or through certificates of compliance, to be developed. And so they're very much at risk. So you can see that this dairy belt is very much at risk. Well, so one of the things that is a kind of, you do research and you find things out, and it tells you compelling stories, and then you get to share those compelling stories with decision makers and the public, and they go, oh, now I get it. I get why we should care about dairies. So I like to call this the multiple benefits of conservation: cows, fish, open space, cheese, jobs, and money. And I'm sure there's more, and we'll add them when that comes in. But I'm sure you've all tried, Cowgirl Creamery, Rouget Noir, some of the great artisanal cheeses that are coming out of that region. And it's just been a completely rocketing uphill trend. right? Just a few years ago, it was 120 million in annual sales and 8 million pounds of cheese. 332 people are employed. There's 22 plants. 70% of these artisanal cheese producers own both the land and the dairy. And the part that we were fascinated by, this was a study by UC Cooperative Extension, is that 72% of these artisanal cheese producers have agricultural conservation easements on their property, either done predominantly by us or by Malt, in some cases by another land trust. And I think I want to underline this last bit, they used the proceeds of the conservation investment to capitalize their transition to artisanal cheese. So they went from being basically a low-value, marginal ag enterprise that had to maximize every square inch of the property to, as Sue Conley says, when you have a higher value proposition, when you go from Hershey's to Scharfenberger, although I guess Hershey's bought Scharfenberger, so that's no longer relevant. But anyway, what used to be Scharfenberger, then you can have a smaller footprint. And so the benefits, so it's great to have this huge economic driver because of an investment in conservation. So it's a great public-private partnership example, and one that, once triggered, will be self-sustaining, hopefully, as long as people like cheese. I mean, Prince Charles came out to try it, so I'm assuming it's got some traction. So the co-benefits of ag conservation, and this is the part that has not been monetized and that we will be monetizing as part of this process so we can tell the whole story, is we get carbon sequestration in the soil, in forests. We get biological diversity. We get coho protection. These species are on the brink of extinction, and no one wants that to happen on our watch. We get recreational tourism, huge in Sonoma County. We get scenic vistas, we get air and water quality, and we get public health. So there are all these benefits that we're really looking forward to more formally monetizing and then telling the story about. We absolutely want to keep ag viable, and it's part of the open space equation. And the reality is a lot of these agricultural landowners protect huge amounts of habitat. In fact, that's another study we want to do, is look at these vineyard producers that people like to rag on. The reality is probably 70% of many of their ownerships are in riparian or forest or something else. So finally, again, natural capital appreciates, built capital depreciates, and we need to really get that message out there. These are all of our organizations and our websites, and I really want to thank you for listening to us and really look forward to hearing your thoughts about how we can push this agenda forward.
We have a few questions. If you do not have a card, raise your hand and you will get one really quickly. Before I ask the questions here before me, if we run out of time, I'd like to encourage you to go to their websites. It's in your brochures under their bios. And direct the question specifically to either Karen or Andrea, or perhaps they can stay a few minutes after to answer questions if you would like to do it at this time today. First question is, given California's drought, will we see erosion of environmental protection, increased overdraft of groundwater, and lack of progress on saving fish and aquatic species? Which one do you want to? Do you want me to repeat the question, or?
We'll both take a stab at that. Obviously, for those of you who still read the newspaper, which is me, it seems like every day I open the paper and there's an environmental conservation-related issue going on, which isn't being thought of as a conservation environmental-related issue. I think working closely, as Karen said, this new paradigm of conservation entities working with water districts, local water districts, is absolutely imperative because each water picture is going to be different from region to region. But the work that we're doing is going to help our water districts, not tomorrow or next month, but planning for the next 5 years, 10 years, 100 years about our local water supply. In Santa Clara County, 50% of our water supply comes from the Sierra Nevada through the Bay Delta system. And their long-range plans assume that 50% flow will still continue. The other 50% resides in our groundwater and our aquifers, which is under threat of development and being paved over. So that's what our charge is now, is to help with this long-range planning, long-range policy, and sharing and funding to make sure that those places stay what they're supposed to do, aquifers and groundwater recharge areas.
Karen, or do you want to add to that? Okay. Second question. I have heard that of the drought, if the drought continues long-term, we may have to allow some animal species to go extinct. True?
Well, there's a lot of opinions out there. I mean, I don't want to diminish the potential massive conflict that is emerging between biological diversity and agricultural viability and, human drinking water needs. And depending upon how bad things get, I think there will certainly be people advocating for that position. And I think it's going to take a lot of leadership on the part of local electeds and also regional and state electeds to make sure, as Jerry Brown has done, that he's advocating for, that people get extremely aggressive about water conservation.
Virginia, I want to add to that. I want to draw a parallel between that question that was just asked and the future of agriculture in my own county, Santa Clara County. The paradigm that we have today is that a place like the Coyote Valley, that was long seen as a place for the tech sector to locate their big campuses and homes to support those jobs, et cetera, is now laid fallow because of the slowdown in the economy, which is now picking up again. And the mantra that keeps getting repeated over and over again is that agriculture is dead there. Agriculture is going to have to move someplace else. But that's based on today's picture. What if, as many are working hard on, you were to secure those lands for agriculture and natural resources and bring in a new kind of farmer who would want to farm those lands more efficiently, the Sue Conleys of the world, for a higher value crop that uses natural resources less intensely and also allows those co-benefits that we talked about. So we need people to think more creatively, not just about what's happening today, but what picture we want tomorrow, and to work toward that.
I'm going to take my prerogative here and give a little bit of information on, I know the East Bay Regional Park District, as well as the portion of the Santa Clara County, are in habitat plans, which determine rescuing or looking at the endangered species, and have lists of endangered species. In our case, down in Santa Clara County, there's about 24 species that are listed. And this new agency, the Habitat Valley Agency, a mandate is to, through development mitigation, conserve lands specifically related in large enough ecosystems to allow those things to thrive. In our county, one of the things is the checker spot butterfly. I'm not so familiar with the East Bay's habitat plan. And those plans do allow to help those that are more at risk, but we don't know what climate change will bring. Second, another question. How do you balance the economic impact of property taxes if green space is developed?
I think that's a specious argument, and there have been a number of studies done, one at the Center for the American West at Stanford University about 2 years ago, that showed that open space protection is not taking away land that would, for the most part, provide needed housing for the growing Bay Area communities. So I don't think, but nonetheless, that's not to say we don't need to educate ourselves about that and speak to the community, speak to the housing advocates, because I think, and Jeremy's probably still here, the conservation community is increasingly supporting developers of infill housing, Plan Bay Area and so on. So we're making kind of smart arguments and joining forces with those who want to see the region grow sustainably and house the people that will come to the Bay Area without unnecessarily plowing over and paving over the areas we talked about today in the name of providing needed housing.
And I would add that, I think there might be a misunderstanding about the way that a lot of conservation organizations work, which is that they place easements over land and extinguish development rights. Not all, many of them buy property and fee. But in that scenario, the property stays on the tax rolls. In addition, and I think we'll be doing a little bit of this in this process, a lot of the externalities associated with development, and I know you've all read papers on this, are just not accounted for. So that Cooley Ranch example, the externalities associated with vehicle miles traveled, wear and tear on roads, the development of roads, the extension of infrastructure for water supply, broadband, phone lines, none of those costs go to the taxpayers. I mean, some of them are covered by the developer, but ultimately those are costs that are borne by the community. And so when you actually think about the costs of development, you have to kind of remove that from the beneficial side of the equation. And then again, getting back to this point of perpetuity and long-term benefits of conservation, it's very, very difficult to argue as long as you give the economic analysis enough time.
There's one last question, and I'm going to, one of you can answer this. Why isn't Marin one of the counties included in this study?
We've been actually talking to Marin in the last few weeks, and I think they are definitely interested in joining the coalition. So, while they're not formally a Moore Foundation grantee, at least at this point, we have been discussing with them, collaborating with Earth Economics and making sure that we're complementing one another. And we all have a long history of working with Marin County and absolutely view them as complete collaborators, and I think they'll probably come online in the next few months.
Well, that concludes the speakers on panel 2. As I said before, if there's a burning question you have, you might be able to catch them afterwards or go online to their websites and you'll get an answer from the source. Thank you.